The History of Herodotus, Book 1, the first book of the histories called Clio. This is the showing forth of the inquiry of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, to the end that neither the deeds of men may be forgotten by lapse of time, nor the works great and marvelous, which have been produced some by Hellenes, and some by barbarians, may lose their renown, and especially that the causes may be remembered for which these waged war with one another. Those of the Persians who have knowledge of history declare that the Phoenicians first began the quarrel. These, they say, came from that which is called the Erythraean Sea to this of ours, and having settled in the land where they continue even now to dwell, set themselves forthwith to make long voyages by sea, and conveying merchandise of Egypt and of Assyria, they arrived at other places, and also at Argos. Now Argos was at that time in all points the first of the states within that land which is now called Hellas. The Phoenicians arrived then at this land of Argos, and began to dispose of their ships' cargo, and on the 5th or 6th day after they had arrived, when their goods had been almost all sold, there came down to the sea a great company of women, and among them the daughter of the king, and her name, as the Hellenes also agree, was Io, the daughter of Inachos. These, standing near to the stern of the ship, were buying of the wares such as pleased them most, when of a sudden the Phoenicians, passing the word from one to another, made a rush upon them, and the greater part of the women escaped by flight, but Io and certain others were carried off. So they put them on board their ship, and forthwith departed, sailing away to Egypt. In this manner the Persians report that Io came to Egypt, not agreeing therein with the Hellenes, and this, they say, was the first beginning of wrongs. Then after this, they say, certain Hellenes, but the name of the people they are not able to report, put into the city of Tyre in Phoenicia, and carried off the king's daughter Europa. These would doubtless be Cretans, and so they were quits for the former injury. After this, however, the Hellenes, they say, were the authors of the second wrong, for they sailed into Aa of Colchis, and to the river Phasis, with a ship of war, and from thence, after they had done the other business for which they came, they carried off the king's daughter. Medea and the king of Colchis sent a herald to the land of Hellas, and demanded satisfaction for the rape, and to have his daughter back. But they answered that, as the barbarians had given them no satisfaction for the rape of Io the Argive, so neither would they give satisfaction to the barbarians for this. In the next generation after this, they say, Alexander the son of Priam, having heard of these things, desired to get a wife for himself by violence from Hellas, being fully assured that he would not be compelled to give any satisfaction for this wrong, inasmuch as the Hellenes gave none for theirs. So he carried off Helen, and the Hellenes resolved to send messengers first, and to demand her back with satisfaction for the rape. And when they put forth this demand, the others alleged to them the rape of Medea, saying that the Hellenes were now desiring satisfaction to be given to them by others, though they had given none themselves, nor had surrendered the person when demand was made. Up to this point, they say, nothing more happened than the carrying away of women on both sides, but after this the Hellenes were very greatly to blame, for they set the first example of war, making an expedition into Asia before the barbarians made any into Europe. Now they say that in their judgment, though it is an act of wrong to carry away women by force, it is a folly to set one's heart on taking vengeance for their rape, and the wise course is to pay no regard when they have been carried away, for it is evident that they would never be carried away if they were not themselves willing to go. And the Persians say that they, namely the people of Asia, when their women were carried away by force, had made it a matter of no account, but the Hellenes, on account of a woman of Lacedaemon, gathered together a great armament, and then came to Asia and destroyed the dominion of Priam, and that from this time forward they had always considered the Hellenic race to be their enemy, for Asia and the barbarian races which dwell there the Persians claim as belonging to them, but Europe and the Hellenic race they consider to be parted off from them. The Persians, for their part, say that things happened thus, and they conclude that the beginning of their quarrel with the Hellenes was on account of the taking of Ilion. But as regards Io, the Phoenicians do not agree with the Persians in telling the tale thus, for they deny that they carried her off to Egypt by violent means. And they say, on the other hand, that when they were in Argos she was intimate with the master of their ship, and perceiving that she was with child, she was ashamed to confess it to her parents, and therefore sailed away with the Phoenicians of her own will, for fear of being found out. These are the tales told by the Persians and the Phoenicians severally. And concerning these things I am not going to say that they happened thus or thus, but when I have pointed to the man who first within my own knowledge began to commit wrong against the Hellenes, I shall go forward further with the story, giving an account of the cities of men, small as well as great, for those which in old times were great have for the most part become small, while those that were in my own time great used in former times to be small. So then, since I know that human prosperity never continues steadfast, I shall make mention of both indifferently. Croesus was Lydian by race, the son of Aliats and ruler of the nations which dwell on this side of the river Halys, which river, flowing from the south between the Syrians and the Paphlagonians, runs out towards the north wind, into that sea which is called the Euxine. This Croesus, first of all the barbarians of whom we have knowledge, subdued certain of the Hellenes and forced them to pay tribute, while others he gained over and made them his friends. Those whom he subdued were the Ionians, the Aeolians, and the Dorians who dwell in Asia, and those whom he made his friends were the Lacedaemonians. But before the reign of Croesus all the Hellenes were free, for the expedition of the Cimmerians which came upon Ionia before the time of Croesus was not a conquest of the cities, but a plundering incursion only. Now the supremacy which had belonged to the Heracleidae came to the family of Croesus, called Myrmidai, in the following manner. Candoles, whom the Hellenes call Myrsilos, was ruler of Sardes and a descendant of Alcaios, son of Heracles, for Agron, the son of Ninos, the son of Belos, the son of Alcaios, was the first of the Heracleidae, who became king of Sardes, and Candoles, the son of Myrsos, was the last. But those who were kings over this land before Agron were descendants of Lydos, the son of Attis, whence this whole nation was called Lydian, having been before called Meonian. From these the Heracleidae, descended from Heracles and the slave girl of Iardanos, obtained the government, being charged with it by reason of an oracle, and they reigned for 22 generations of men, 505 years, handing on the power from father to son, till the time of Candoles the son of Myrsos. This Candoles then of whom I speak had become passionately in love with his own wife, and having become so, he deemed that his wife was fairer by far than all other women, and thus deeming to Gyges the son of Daskylos, for he of all his spearmen was the most pleasing to him, to this Gyges, I say, he used to impart as well the more weighty of his affairs as also the beauty of his wife, praising it above measure. And after no long time, since it was destined that evil should happen to Candoles, he said to Gyges as follows: Gyges, I think that thou dost not believe me when I tell thee of the beauty of my wife, for it happens that men's ears are less apt of belief than their eyes. Contrive therefore means by which thou mayest look upon her naked. But he cried aloud and said, Master, what word of unwisdom is this which thou dost utter, bidding me look upon my mistress naked? When a woman puts off her tunic, she puts off her modesty also. Moreover, of old time those fair sayings have been found out by men, from which we ought to learn wisdom, and of these one is this, that each man should look on his own. But I believe indeed that she is of all women the fairest, and I entreat thee not to ask of me that which it is not lawful for me to do. With such words as these he resisted, fearing lest some evil might come to him from this. But the king answered him thus: Be of good courage, Gyges, and have no fear either of me that I am saying these words to try thee, or of my wife, lest any harm may happen to thee from her. For I will contrive it so from the first that she shall not even perceive that she has been seen by thee. I will place thee in the room where we sleep, behind the open door, and after I have gone in, my wife also will come to lie down. Now there is a seat near the entrance of the room, and upon this she will lay her garments as she takes them off one by one, and so thou wilt be able to gaze upon her at full leisure. And when she goes from the chair to the bed, and thou shalt be behind her back, then let it be thy part to take care that she sees thee not as thou goest through the door. He then, since he might not avoid it, gave consent, and Candoles, when he considered that it was time to rest, led Gyges to the chamber. And straightway after this the woman also appeared. And Gyges looked, upon her after she came in, and as she laid down her garments, and when she had her back turned towards him, as she went to the bed. Then he slipped away from his hiding place and was going forth, and as he went out the woman caught sight of him, and perceiving that which had been done by her husband, she did not cry out, though struck with shame, but she made as though she had not perceived the matter, meaning to avenge herself upon Candace. For among the Lydians, as also among most other barbarians, it is a shame even for a man to be seen naked. At the time then she kept silence, as I say, and made no outward sign, but as soon as day had dawned, and she made ready those of the servants whom she perceived to be the most attached to herself, and after that she sent to summon Gyges. He then, not supposing that anything of that which had been done was known to her, came upon her summons, for he had been accustomed before to go whenever the queen summoned him. And when Gyges was come, the woman said to him these words, "There are now 2 ways open to thee, Gyges, and I give thee the choice which of the 2 thou wilt prefer to take. Either thou must slay Candace and possess both me and the kingdom of Lydia, or thou must thyself here on the spot be slain, so that thou mayest not in future, by obeying Candace in all things, see that which thou shouldest not. Either he must die who formed this design, or thou who hast looked upon me naked, and done that which is not accounted lawful." For a time then Gyges was amazed at these words, and afterwards he began to entreat her that she would not bind him by necessity to make such a choice. Then, however, as he could not prevail with her, but saw that necessity was in truth set before him, either to slay his master, or to be himself slain by others, he made the choice to live himself, and he inquired further as follows: "Since thou dost compel me to take my master's life against my own will, let me hear from thee also what is the manner in which we shall lay hands upon him." And she answering said, "From that same place shall the attempt be, where he displayed me naked, and we will lay hands upon him as he sleeps." So after they had prepared the plot, when night came on, for Gyges was not let go, nor was there any way of escape for him, but he must either be slain himself or slay Candace, he followed the woman to the bedchamber, and she gave him a dagger and concealed him behind that very same door. Then afterwards, while Candace was sleeping, Gyges came privily up to him and slew him, and he obtained both his wife and his kingdom. Of him, moreover, Archilochus, the Parian, who lived about that time, made mention in a trimeter iambic verse. He obtained the kingdom, however, and was strengthened in it by means of the oracle at Delphi. For when the Lydians were angry because of the fate of Candace and had risen in arms, a treaty was made between the followers of Gyges and the other Lydians to this effect, that if the oracle should give answer that he was to be king of the Lydians, he should be king, and if not, he should give back the power to the sons of Heracles. So the oracle gave answer, and Gyges accordingly became king. Yet the Pythian prophetess said this also, that vengeance for the Heraclidae should come upon the descendants of Gyges in the 5th generation. Of this oracle the Lydians and their kings made no account until it was in fact fulfilled. Thus the Memnadae obtained the government, having driven out from it the Heraclidae. And Gyges, when he became ruler, sent votive offerings to Delphi, not a few, for of all the silver offerings at Delphi his are more in number than those of any other man. And besides the silver, he offered a vast quantity of gold, and especially one offering which is more worthy of mention than the rest, namely 6 golden mixing bowls, which are dedicated there as his gift. Of these the weight is 30 talents, and they stand in the treasury of the Corinthians, though in truth this treasury does not belong to the state of the Corinthians, but is that of Kypselos the son of Aetion. This Gyges was the first of the barbarians within our knowledge who dedicated votive offerings at Delphi, except only Midas the son of Gordius, king of Phrygia, who dedicated for an offering the royal throne on which he sat before all to decide causes. And this throne, a sight worth seeing, stands in the same place with the bowls of Gyges. This gold and silver which Gyges dedicated is called Gygion by the people of Delphi, after the name of him who offered it. Now Gyges also, as soon as he became king, led an army against Miletus and Smyrna, and he took the lower town of Colophon, but no other. Great deed did he do in his reign, which lasted 38 years. Therefore we will pass him by with no more mention than has already been made. And I will speak now of Ardys the son of Gyges, who became king after Gyges. He took Priene and made an invasion against Miletus, and while he was ruling over Sardis, the Cimmerians, driven from their abodes by the nomad Scythians, came to Asia and took Sardis except the citadel. Now when Ardys had been king for 49 years, Sardiats's son succeeded to his kingdom and reigned 12 years. And after him Aliats. This last made war against Cyaxares, the descendant of Diox, and against the Medes, and he drove the Cimmerians forth out of Asia. And he took Smyrna, which had been founded from Colophon, and made an invasion against Clazomenae. From this he ed not as he desired, but with great loss. During his reign, however, he performed other deeds very worthy of mention as follows. He made war with those of Miletos, having received this war as an inheritance from his father, for he used to invade their land and besiege Miletos in the following manner. Whenever there were ripe crops upon the land, then he led an army into their confines, making his march to the sound of pipes and harps and flutes, both of male and female tone. And when he came to the Milesian land, he neither pulled down the houses that were in the fields, nor set fire to them, nor tore off their doors, but let them stand as they were. The trees, however, and the crops that were upon the land he destroyed, and then departed by the way he came. For the men of Miletos had command of the sea, so that it was of no use for his army to blockade them, and he abstained from pulling down the houses to the end that the Milesians might have places to dwell in while they sowed and tilled the land, and by the means of their labor he might have somewhat to destroy when he made his invasion. Thus he continued to war with them for 11 years, and in the course of these years the Milesians suffered 2 great defeats, once when they fought a battle in the district of Lemenion in their own land, and again in the plain of Myander. Now for 6 of the 11 years Sardiats the son of Ardys was still ruler of the Lydians, the same who was wont to invade the land of Miletos at the times mentioned. 16 for this Sardiats was he who first began the war. But for the 5 years which followed these first 6, the war was carried on by Aliats the son of Sardiats, who received it as an inheritance from his father, as I have already said, and applied himself to it earnestly. And none of the Ionians helped those of Miletos bear the burden of this war, except only the men of Chios. These came to their aid to pay back like with like, for the Milesians had formerly assisted the Chians throughout their war with the people of Erythrae. Then in the 12th year of the war, when standing corn was being burnt by the army of the Lydians, it happened as follows. As soon as the corn was kindled, it was driven by a violent wind, and set fire to the temple of Athene, surnamed of Acessos, and the temple being set on fire was burnt down to the ground. Of this no account was made then, but afterwards, when the army had ed to Sardis, Aliats fell sick, and as his sickness lasted long, he sent messengers to inquire of the oracle at Delphi, either being advised to do so by someone, or because he himself thought it best to send and inquire of the god concerning his sickness. But when these arrived at Delphi, the Pythian prophetess said that she would give them no answer, until they should have built up again the temple of Athene which they had burnt at Acessos in the land of Miletos. Thus much I know by the report of the people of Delphi, but the Milesians add to this that Periander the son of Kypselos, being a special guest friend of Thrasybulus, the then despot of Miletos, heard of the oracle which had been given to Aliats, and sending a messenger told Thrasybulus, in order that he might have knowledge of it beforehand, and take such counsel as the case required. This is the story told by the Milesians. And Aliats, when this answer was reported to him, sent a herald forthwith to Miletos, desiring to make a truce with Thrasybulus and the Milesians for so long a time as he should be building the temple. He then was being sent as envoy to Miletos, and Thrasybulus in the meantime being informed beforehand of the whole matter, and knowing what Aliats was meaning to do, contrived this device. He gathered together in the marketplace all the store of provisions which was found in the city, both his own and that which belonged to private persons. And he proclaimed to the Milesians that on a signal given by him they should all begin to drink and make merry with one another. This Thrasybulus did, and thus proclaimed to the end that the herald from Sardis, seeing a vast quantity of provisions carelessly piled up, and the people feasting, might report this to Aliats, and so on fact it happened, for When the herald ed to Sardis, after seeing this and delivering to Thrasybulus the charge which was given to him by the king of Lydia, the peace which was made came about, as I am informed, merely because of this. For Aliats, who thought that there was a great famine in Miletus and that the people had been worn down to the extreme of misery, heard from the herald, when he ed from Miletus, the opposite to that which he himself supposed. And after this the peace was made between them on condition of being guest friends and allies to one another, and Aliats built 2 temples to Athene at Sessos in place of one, and himself recovered from his sickness. With regard then to the war waged by Aliats with the Milesians and Thrasybulus, things went thus. As for Periander, the man who gave information about the oracle to Thrasybulus, he was the son of Kypselus and despot of Corinth. In his life, say the Corinthians, and with them agree the Lesbians, there happened to him a very great marvel, namely that Arion of Methymna was carried ashore at Taenaron upon a dolphin's back. This man was a harper second to none of those who then lived, and the first, so far as we know, who composed a dithyramb, naming it so and teaching it to a chorus at Corinth. This Arion, they say, who for the most part of his time stayed with Periander, conceived a desire to sail to Italy and Sicily, and after he had there acquired large sums of money, he wished to again to Corinth. He set forth therefore from Tyrus, and as he had faith in Corinthians more than in other men, he hired a ship with a crew of Corinthians. These, the story says, when out in open sea, formed a plot to cast Arion overboard and so possess his wealth, and he, having obtained knowledge of this, made entreaties to them, offering them his wealth and asking them to grant him his life. With this, however, he did not prevail upon them, but the men who were conveying him bade him either slay himself there, that he might receive burial on the land, or leap straightway into the sea. So Arion, being driven to a strait, entreated them that, since they were so minded, they would allow him to take his stand in full minstrel's garb upon the deck of the ship, and sing, and he promised to put himself to death after he had sung. They then, well pleased to think that they should hear the best of all minstrels upon earth, drew back from the stern towards the middle of the ship, and he put on the full minstrel's garb and took his lyre, and standing on the deck performed the Orthian measure. Then, as the measure ended, he threw himself into the sea just as he was, in his full minstrel's garb, and they went on sailing away to Corinth, but him, they say, a dolphin supported on its back and brought him to shore at Taenaron. And when he had come to land, he proceeded to Corinth with his minstrel's garb. Thither having arrived, he related all that had been done, and Periander, doubting of his story, kept Arion in guard, and would let him go nowhere, while he kept careful watch for those who had conveyed him. When these came, he called them and inquired of them if they had any report to make of Arion, and when they said that he was safe in Italy, and that they had left him at Tyrus, faring well, Arion suddenly appeared before them in the same guise as when he made his leap from the ship, and they, being struck with amazement, were no longer able to deny when they were questioned. This is the tale told by the Corinthians and Lesbians alike. And there is at Taenaron a votive offering of Arion of no great size, namely a bronze figure of a man upon a dolphin's back, Aliats the Lydian, when he had thus waged war against the Milesians, afterwards died, having reigned 57 years. This king, when he recovered from his sickness, dedicated a votive offering at Delphi, being the second of his house who had so done, namely a great mixing bowl of silver with a stand for it of iron welded together, which last is a sight worth seeing above all the offerings at Delphi, and the work of Glaucus the Chian, who of all men first found out the art of welding iron. After Aliats was dead, Croesus, the son of Aliats, received the kingdom in succession, being 35 years of age. He, as I said, fought against the Hellenes, and of them he attacked the Ephesians first. The Ephesians then, being besieged by him, dedicated their city to Artemis, and tied a rope from the temple to the wall of the city. Now the distance between the ancient city, which was then being besieged, and the temple is 7 furlongs. These, I say, were the first upon whom Croesus laid hands, but afterwards he did the same to the other Ionian and Aeolian cities one by one, alleging against them various causes of complaint, and making serious charges against those in whose cases he could find serious grounds, while against others of them he charged merely trifling offences. Then, when the Hellenes in Asia had been conquered and forced to pay tribute, he designed next to build for himself ships and to lay hands upon those who dwelt in the islands. And when all was prepared for his building of ships, they say that Bias of Priene, or according to another account, Pittacus of Mytilene, came to Sardis, and being asked by Croesus whether there was any new thing doing in Hellas, brought to an end his building of ships by this saying, "O king," said he, "the men of the islands are hiring a troop of 10,000 horse, and with this they mean to march to Sardis and fight against thee." And Croesus, supposing that what he reported was true, said, "May the gods put it into the minds of the dwellers of the islands to come with horses against the sons of the Lydians." And he answered and said, "O king, I perceive that thou dost earnestly desire to catch the men of the islands on the mainland, riding upon horses, and it is not unreasonable that thou shouldest wish for this. What else, however, thinkest thou the men of the islands desire, and have been praying for ever since the time they heard that thou wert about to build ships against them, than that they might catch the Lydians upon the sea, so as to take vengeance upon thee for the Hellenes who dwell upon the mainland, whom thou dost hold enslaved?" Croesus, they say, was greatly pleased with this conclusion, and obeying his suggestion, for he judged him to speak suitably, he stopped his building of ships, and upon that he formed a friendship with the Ionians dwelling in the islands. As time went on, when nearly all those dwelling on this side the river Halys had been subdued, for except the Cilicians and Lycians Croesus subdued, and kept under his rule all the nations, that is to say, Lydians, Phrygians, Mysians, Mariandyni, Chalybians, Paphlagonians, Thracians, both Thynian and Bithynian, Carians, Ionians, Dorians, Aeolians, and Pamphylians. When these, I say, had been subdued, and while he was still adding to his Lydian dominions, there came to Sardis, then at the height of its wealth, all the wise men of the Hellas who chanced to be alive at that time, brought thither severally by various occasions, and of them one was Solon the Athenian, who after he had made laws for the Athenians at their bidding, left his native country for 10 years and sailed away, saying that he desired to visit various lands, in order that he might not be compelled to repeal any of the laws which he had proposed. 26. For of themselves the Athenians were not competent to do this, having bound themselves by solemn oaths to submit for 10 years to the laws which Solon should propose for them. So Solon, having left his native country for this reason, and for the sake of seeing various lands, came to Amasis in Egypt, and also to Croesus at Sardis. Having there arrived, he was entertained as a guest by Croesus in the king's palace, and afterwards, on the 3rd or 4th day, at the bidding of Croesus, his servants led Solon round to see his treasuries, and they showed him all things, how great and magnificent they were, and after he had looked upon them all, and examined them as he had occasion, Croesus asked him as follows: "Athenian guest, much report of thee has come to us, both in regard to thy wisdom and thy wanderings. How that in thy search for wisdom thou hast traversed many lands to see them. Now therefore a desire has come upon me to ask thee whether thou hast seen any whom thou deemest to be of all men the most happy." This he asked, supposing that he himself was the happiest of men. But Solon, using no flattery but the truth only, said, "Yes, O king, Telos the Athenian." And Croesus, marveling at that which he said, asked him earnestly, "In what respect dost thou judge Telos to be the most happy?" And he said, "Telos, in the first place, living while his native state was prosperous, had sons fair and good, and saw from all of them children begotten and living to grow up. And secondly, he had what with us is accounted wealth, and after his life, a most glorious end. For when a battle was fought by the Athenians at Eleusis against the neighboring people, he brought up supports and routed the foe, and there died by a most fair death, and the Athenians buried him publicly where he fell, and honored him greatly. So when Solon had moved Croesus to inquire further by the story of Telos, recounting how many points of happiness he had, the king asked again whom he had seen proper to be placed next after this man, supposing that he himself would certainly obtain at least the second place, but he replied, "Cleobis and Beton, for these who were of Argos by race possessed a sufficiency of wealth, and in addition to this, strength of body, such as I shall tell, both equally had won prizes in the games. and moreover the following tale is told of them. There was a feast of Hera among the Argives, and it was by all means necessary that their mother should be borne in a car to the temple. But since their oxen were not brought up in time from the field, the young men, barred from all else by lack of time, submitted themselves to the yoke, and drew the wain, their mother being borne by them upon it. And so they brought it on for 45 furlongs, and came to the temple. Then after they had done this, and had been seen by the assembled crowd, there came to their life a most excellent ending, and in this the deity declared that it was better for man to die than to continue to live. For the Argive men were standing round and extolling the strength of the young men, while the Argive women were extolling the mother to whose lot it had fallen to have such sons, and the mother being exceedingly rejoiced both by the deed itself and by the report made of it, took her stand in front of the image of the goddess, and prayed that she would give to Cleobis and Biton her sons, who had honored her greatly, that gift which is best for man to receive. And after this prayer, when they had sacrificed and feasted, the young men lay down to sleep within the temple itself, and never rose again, but were held bound in this last end. And the Argives made statues in the likeness of them, and dedicated them as offerings at Delphi, thinking that they had proved themselves most excellent. Thus Solon assigned the second place in respect of happiness to these, and Croesus was moved to anger and said, "Athenian guest, hast thou then so cast aside our prosperous state as worth nothing, that thou dost prefer to us even men of private station?" And he said, "Croesus, thou art inquiring about human fortunes of one who well knows that the deity is altogether envious and apt to disturb our lot. For in the course of long time a man may see many things which he would not desire to see, and suffer also many things which he would not desire to suffer. The limit of life for a man I lay down at 70 years, and these 70 years give 25,200 days, not reckoning for any intercalated month. Then if every other one of these years shall be made longer by 1 month, that the seasons may be caused to come round at the due time of the year, the intercalated months will be in number 35 besides the 70 years, and of these months the days will be 1,050. Of all these days being in number 26,250, which go to the 70 years, one day produces nothing at all which resembles what another brings with it. Thus then, O Croesus, man is altogether a creature of accident. As for thee, I perceive that thou art both great in wealth and king of many men, but that of which thou didst ask me I cannot call thee yet, until I learn that thou hast brought thy life to a fair ending. For the very rich man is not at all to be accounted more happy than he who has but his subsistence from day to day, unless also the fortune go with him of ending his life well in possession of all things fair. For many very wealthy men are not happy, while many who have but a moderate living are fortunate, and in truth the very rich man who is not happy has 2 advantages only as compared with the poor man who is fortunate, whereas this latter has many as compared with the rich man who is not happy. The rich man is able better to fulfill his desire, and also to endure a great calamity if it fall upon him, whereas the other has advantage over him in these things which follow. He is not indeed able equally with the rich man to endure a calamity or to fulfill his desire, but these his good fortune keeps away from him, while he is sound of limb, free from disease, untouched by suffering, the father of fair children, and himself of comely form. And if in addition to this he shall end his life well, he is worthy to be called that which thou seekest, namely a happy man. But before he comes to his end, it is well to hold back, and not to call him yet happy but only fortunate. Now to possess all these things together is impossible for one who is mere man, just as no single land suffices to supply all things for itself, but one thing it has and another it lacks, and the land that has the greatest number of things is the best, so also in the case of a man. No single person is complete in himself, for one thing he has and another he lacks, but whosoever of men continues to the end in possession of the greatest number of these things, and then has a gracious ending of his life, he is by me accounted worthy, O king, to receive this name. But we must of everything examine the end and how it will turn out at the last, for to many God shows but a glimpse of happiness, and then plucks them up by the roots and overturns them. Thus saying, he refused to gratify Croesus, who sent him away from his presence, holding him in no esteem, and thinking him utterly senseless, in that he passed over present good things and bade men look to the end of every matter. After Solon had departed, a great retribution from God came upon Croesus, probably because he judged himself to be the happiest of all men. First there came and stood by him a dream, which showed to him the truth of the evils that were about to come to pass in respect of his son. Now Croesus had 2 sons, of whom one was deficient, seeing that he was deaf and dumb, while the other far surpassed his companions of the same age in all things, and the name of this last was Attis. As regards this Attis, then, the dream signified to Croesus that he should lose him by the blow of an iron spear point, and when he rose up from sleep, and considered the matter with himself, he was struck with fear on account of the dream, and first he took for his son a wife, and whereas his son had been wont to lead the armies of the Lydians, he now no longer sent him forth anywhere on any such business, and the javelins and lances and all such things which men use for fighting he conveyed out of the men's apartments and piled them up in the inner bedchambers, for fear lest something hanging up might fall down upon his son. Then, while he was engaged about the marriage of his son, there came to Sardis a man under a misfortune, and with hands not clean, a Phrygian by birth, and of the royal house. This man came to the house of Croesus, and according to the customs which prevail in that land made request that he might have cleansing. And Croesus gave him cleansing. Now the manner of cleansing among the Lydians is the same almost as that which the Hellenes use. So when Croesus had done that which was customary, he asked of him whence he came and who he was, saying as follows, Man, who art thou? And from what region of Phrygia didst thou come to sit upon my hearth? And whom of men or women didst thou slay? And he replied, O king, I am the son of Gordius, the son of Midas, and I am called Adrastos. And I slew my own brother against my will, and therefore am I here, having been driven forth by my father and deprived of all that I had. And Croesus answered thus, Thou art, as it chances, the offshoot of men who are our friends, and thou hast come to friends, among whom thou shalt want of nothing so long as thou shalt remain in our land, and thou wilt find it most for thy profit to bear this misfortune as lightly as may be. So he had his abode with Croesus. During this time there was produced in the Mysian Olympus a boar of monstrous size. This, coming down from the mountain aforesaid, ravaged the fields of the Mysians, and although the Mysians went out against it often, yet they could do it no hurt, but rather received hurt themselves from it. So at length messengers came from the Mysians to Croesus and said, O king, there has appeared in our land a boar of monstrous size, which lays waste our fields, and we, desiring eagerly to take it, are not able. Now therefore we ask of thee to send with us thy son, and also a chosen band of young men with dogs, that we may destroy it out of our land. Thus they made request, and Croesus, calling to mind the words of the dreams, spoke to them as follows, As touching my son, make no further mention of him in this matter, for I will not send him with you, seeing that he is newly married and is concerned now with the affairs of his marriage, but I will send with you chosen men of the Lydians and the whole number of my hunting dogs, and I will give command to those who go, to be as zealous as may be in helping you to destroy the wild beast out of your land. Thus he made reply, and while the Mysians were being contented with this answer, there came in also the son of Croesus, having heard of the request made by the Mysians, and when Croesus said that he would not send his son with them, the young man spoke as follows, My father, in times past the fairest and most noble part was allotted to us, to go out continually to wars and to the chase, and so have good repute, but now thou hast debarred me from both of these, although thou hast not observed in me any cowardly or faint-hearted spirit. And now with what face must I appear when I go to and from the marketplace of the city? What kind of a man shall I be esteemed by the citizens, and what kind of a man shall I be esteemed by my newly married wife? With what kind of a husband will she think that she is mated? Therefore either let me go to the hunt, or persuade me by reason that these things are better for me done, as now they are. And Croesus made answer thus, My son, not because I have observed in thee any spirit of cowardice or any other ungracious thing, do I act thus, but a vision of a dream came and stood by me in my sleep and told me that thou shouldest be short-lived, and that thou shouldest perish by a spear-point of iron. With thought of this vision, therefore, I both urged on this marriage for thee, and I refuse now to send thee upon the matter which is being taken in hand, having a care of thee that I may steal thee from thy fate at least for the period of my own life, if by any means possible for me to do so. For thou art, as it chances, my only son, the other I do not reckon as one, seeing that he is deficient in hearing. The young man made answer thus, It may well be forgiven in thee, O my father, that thou shouldest have a care of me after having seen such a vision, but that which thou dost not understand, and in which the meaning of the dream has escaped thee, it is right that I should expound to thee. Thou sayest the dream declared that I should end my life by means of a spear-point of iron. But what hands has a boar, or what spear-point of iron, of which thou art afraid? If the dream had told thee that I should end my life by a tusk, or any other thing which resembles that, it would be right for thee doubtless to do as thou art doing, but it said, by a spear-point. Since therefore our fight will not be with men, let me now go. Croesus made answer, My son, thou dost partly prevail with me by declaring thy judgment about the dream, therefore, having been prevailed upon by thee, I change my resolution, and allow thee to go to the chase. Having thus said, Croesus went to summon Adrastus the Phrygian, and when he came, he addressed him thus, Adrastus, when thou wast struck with a grievous misfortune with which I reproach thee not, I cleansed thee, and I have received thee into my house, supplying all thy costs. Now therefore, since having first received kindness from me thou art bound to requite me with kindness, I ask of thee to be the protector of my son, who goes forth to the chase, lest any evil robbers come upon you by the way to do you harm. And besides this thou too oughtest to go where thou mayest become famous by thy deeds, for it belongs to thee as an inheritance from thy fathers so to do, and moreover thou hast strength for it. Adrastus made answer, O king, but for this I should not have been going to any such contest of valor, for first it is not fitting that one who is suffering such a great misfortune as mine should seek the company of his fellows who are in prosperity, and secondly I have no desire for it, and for many reasons I should have kept myself away. But now, since thou art urgent with me, and I ought to gratify thee, for I am bound to requite thee with kindness, I am ready to do this. Expect therefore that thy son, whom thou commandest me to protect, will home to thee unhurt, so far as his protector may avail to keep him safe. When he had made answer to Croesus in words like these, they afterwards set forth provided with chosen young men and with dogs. And when they were come to Mount Olympus, they tracked the animal, and having found it and taken their stand round in a circle, they were hurling against it their spears. Then the guest, he who had been cleansed of manslaughter, whose name was Adrastus, hurling a spear at it, missed the boar and struck the son of Croesus. So he, being struck by the spear-point, fulfilled the saying of the dream, and one ran to report to Croesus that which had come to pass. And having come to Sardis, he signified to him of the combat and of the fate of his son. And Croesus was very greatly disturbed by the death of his son, and was much the more moved to complaining by this, namely that his son was slain by the man whom he had himself cleansed of manslaughter. And being grievously troubled by the misfortune, he called upon Zeus the cleanser, protesting to him that which he had suffered from his guest, and he called moreover upon the protector of suppliants and the guardian of friendship, naming still the same God, and calling upon him as the protector of suppliants, because when he received the guest into his house, he had been fostering ignorantly the slayer of his son, and as the guardian of friendship, because having sent him as a protector, he had found him the worst of foes. After this the Lydians came bearing the corpse, and behind it followed the slayer, and he, taking his stand before the corpse, delivered himself up to Croesus, holding forth his hands and bidding the king slay him over the corpse, speaking of his former misfortune, and saying that in addition to this he had now been the destroyer of the man who had cleansed him of it, and that life for him was no more worth living. But Croesus, hearing this, pitied Adrastus, although he was himself suffering so great an evil of his own, and said to him, Guest, I have already received from thee all the satisfaction that is due, seeing that thou dost condemn thyself to suffer death, and not thou alone art the cause of this evil, except in so far as thou wert the instrument of it against thine own will, but someone, as I suppose, of the gods, who also long ago signified to me that which was about to be. So Croesus buried his son as was fitting, but Adrastos, the son of Gordius, the son of Midas, he who had been the slayer of his own brother, and the slayer also of the man, who had cleansed him, when silence came of all men round about the tomb, recognizing that he was more grievously burdened by misfortune than all men of whom he knew, slew himself upon the grave. For 2 years then Croesus remained quiet in his mourning, because he was deprived of his son. But after this period of time the overthrowing of the rule of Astyages the son of Cyaxares by Cyrus the son of Cambyses, and the growing greatness of the Persians caused Croesus to cease from his mourning, and led him to a care of cutting short the power of the Persians if by any means he might, while yet it was in growth, and before they should have become great. So having formed this design, he began forthwith to make trial of the oracles, both those of the Hellenes and that in Libya, sending messengers, some to one place and some to another, some to go to Delphi, others to Abai of the Phocians, and others to Dodona, and some were sent to the shrine of Amphiaros and to that of Trophonios, others to Branchidae in the land of Miletos. These are the oracles of the Hellenes, to which Croesus sent messengers to seek divination, and others he sent to the shrine of Ammon in Libya to inquire there. Now he was sending the messengers abroad to the end that he might try the oracles and find out what knowledge they had, so that if they should be found to have knowledge of the truth, he might send and ask them secondly whether he should attempt to march against the Persians. And to the Lydians whom he sent to make trial of the oracles he gave charge as follows, that from the day on which they set out from Sardis they should reckon up the number of the days following, and on the 100th day they should consult the oracles, asking what Croesus the son of Aliats, king of the Lydians, chanced then to be doing, and whatever the oracles severally should prophesy, this they should cause to be written down and bear it back to him. Now what the other oracles prophesied is not by any reported, but at Delphi, so soon as the Lydians entered the sanctuary of the temple to consult the god and ask that which they were commanded to ask, the Pythian prophetess spoke thus in hexameter measure. But the number of sand I know, and the measure of drops in the ocean. The dumb man I understand, and I hear the speech of the speechless, and there hath come to my soul the smell of a strong-shelled tortoise boiling in cauldron of bronze, and the flesh of a lamb mingled with it. Under it bronze is laid, it hath bronze as a clothing upon it. When the Pythian prophetess had uttered this oracle, the Lydians caused the prophecy to be written down, and went away at once to Sardis. And when the rest also who had been sent round were there arrived with the answers of the oracles, then Croesus unfolded the writings one by one and looked upon them, and at first none of them pleased him. But when he heard that from Delphi, forthwith he did worship to the god, and accepted the answer, judging that the oracle at Delphi was the only true one, because it had found out what he himself had done. For when he had sent to the several oracles his messengers to consult the gods, keeping well in mind the appointed day, he contrived the following device. He thought of something which it would be impossible to discover or to conceive of, and cutting up a tortoise and a lamb he boiled them together himself in a cauldron of bronze, laying a cover of bronze over them. This then was the answer given to Croesus from Delphi. And as regards the answer of Amphiaras, I cannot tell what he replied to the Lydians after they had done the things customary in his temple, for there is no record of this any more than of the others, except only that Croesus thought that he also possessed a true oracle. After this, with great sacrifices, he endeavored to win the favor of the god at Delphi, for of all the animals that are fit for sacrifice he offered 3,000 of each kind, and he heaped up couches overlaid with gold and overlaid with silver, and cups of gold and robes of purple, and tunics, making of them a great pyre, and this he burnt up, hoping by these means the more to win over the god to the side of the Lydians. And he proclaimed to all the Lydians that every one of them should make sacrifice with that which each man had. And when he had finished the sacrifice, he melted down a vast quantity of gold, and of it he wrought half plinths, making them 6 palms, 46 in length and 3 in breadth, and in height 1 palm, and their number was 117. Of these 4 were of pure gold, weighing 2 talents and a half each, and others of gold alloyed with silver weighing 2 talents. And he caused to be made also an image of a lion of pure gold weighing 10 talents, which lion, when the temple of Delphi was being burnt down, fell from off the plinths, for upon these it was set, and is placed now in the treasury of the Corinthians, weighing 6 talents and a half, for 3 talents and a half were melted away from it. So Croesus, having finished all these things, sent them to Delphi, and with them these besides, 2 mixing bowls of great size, one of gold and the other of silver, of which the golden bowl was placed on the right hand as one enters the temple, and the silver on the left, but the places of these also were changed. After the temple was burnt down, and the golden bowl is now placed in the treasury of the people of Clazomenae, weighing 8.5 talents and 12 pounds over, while the silver one is placed in the corner of the vestibule, and holds 600 amphor, being filled with wine by the Delphians on the feast of the Theophania. This, the people of Delphi say, is the work of Theodoros the Samian, and as I think rightly, for it is evident to me that the workmanship is of no common kind. Moreover, Croesus sent 4 silver wine jars, which stand in the treasury of the Corinthians, and 2 vessels for lustral water, one of gold and the other of silver, of which the gold one is inscribed from the Lacedaemonians, who say that it is their offering. Therein, however, they do not speak rightly, for this also is from Croesus, but one of the Delphians wrote the inscription upon it, desiring to gratify the Lacedaemonians, and his name I know, but will not make mention of it. The boy through whose hand the water flows is from the Lacedaemonians, but neither of the vessels for lustral water. And many other votive offerings Croesus sent with these, not specially distinguished, among which a certain casting of silver, of a round shape, and also a golden figure of a woman 3 cubits high, which the Delphians say is a statue of the baker of Croesus. Moreover, Croesus dedicated the ornaments from his wife's neck and her girdles. These are the things which he sent to Delphi, and to Amphiaraus, having heard of his valor and of his evil fate, he dedicated a shield made altogether of gold throughout, and a spear all of solid gold, the shaft being of gold also, as well as the 2 points, which offerings were both remaining even to my time at Thebes in the temple of Ismenian Apollo, to the Lydians who were to carry these gifts to the temples. Croesus gave charge that they should ask the oracles this question also, whether Croesus should march against the Persians, and if so, whether he should join with himself any army of men as his friends. And when the Lydians had arrived at the places to which they had been sent, and had dedicated the votive offerings, they inquired of the oracles and said, Croesus, king of the Lydians and of other nations, considering that these are the only true oracles among men, presents to you gifts such as your revelations deserve, and asks you again now whether he shall march against the Persians, and if so, whether he shall join with himself any army of men as allies. They inquired thus, and the answers of both the oracles agreed in one, declaring to Croesus that if he should march against the Persians, he should destroy a great empire, and they counseled him to find out the most powerful of the Hellenes, and join these with himself as friends. So when the answers were brought back and Croesus heard them, he was delighted with the oracles, and expecting that he would certainly destroy the kingdom of Cyrus, he sent again to Pytho, and presented to the men of Delphi, having ascertained the number of them, 2 staters of gold for each man. And in for this, the Delphians gave to Croesus and to the Lydians precedence in consulting the oracle and freedom from all payments, and the right to front seats at the games, with this privilege also for all time, that any one of them who wished should be allowed to become a citizen of Delphi. And having made presents to the men of Delphi, Croesus consulted the oracle the 3rd time, for from the time when he learnt the truth of the oracle, he made abundant use of it. And consulting the oracle, he inquired whether his monarchy would endure for a long time. And the Pythian prophetess answered him thus, But when it cometh to pass that a mule of the Medes shall be monarch, then by the pebbly Hermos, O Lydian delicate-footed, flee and stay not, and be not ashamed to be called a coward. By these lines when they came to him, Croesus was pleased more than by all the rest, for he supposed that a mule would never be ruler of the Medes instead of a man, and accordingly that he himself and his heirs would never cease from their rule. Then after this he gave thought to inquire which people of the Hellenes he should esteem the most powerful, and gain over to himself as friends. and inquiring he found that the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians had the preeminence, the first of the Dorian and the others of the Ionian race, for these were the most eminent races in ancient time, the second being a Pelasgian and the first a Hellenic race, and the one never migrated from its place in any direction, while the other was very exceedingly given to wanderings, for in the reign of Deucalion this race dwelt in Theotis, and in the time of Doros, the son of Helen, in the land lying below Ossa and Olympos, which is called Histiaiotis, and when it was driven from Histiaiotis by the sons of Cadmos, it dwelt in Pindos and was called Macednian, and thence it moved afterwards to Dryopis, and from Dryopis it came finally to Peloponnesus, and began to be called Dorian. What language, however, the Pelasgians used to speak, I am not able with certainty to say, but if one must pronounce, judging by those that still remain of the Pelasgians who dwelt in the city of Creston, above the Tessenians, and who were once neighbors of the race now called Dorian, dwelling then in the land which is now called Thessaliotis, and also by those that remain of the Pelasgians who settled at Placia and Skylake in the region of the Hellespont, who before that had been settlers with the Athenians and of the natives of the various other towns which are really Pelasgian, though they have lost the name. If one must pronounce, judging by these, the Pelasgians used to speak a barbarian language. If therefore all the Pelasgian race was such as these, then the Attic race, being Pelasgian, at the same time when it changed and became Hellenic, unlearnt also its language. For the people of Creston do not speak the same language with any of those who dwell about them, nor yet do the people of Phakia, but they speak the same language one as the other, and by this it is proved that they still keep unchanged the form of language which they brought with them when they migrated to these places. As for the Hellenic race, it has used ever the same language, as I clearly perceive, since it first took its rise, but since the time when it parted off feeble at first. From the Pelasgian race, setting forth from a small beginning, it has increased to that great number of races which we see, and chiefly because many barbarian races have been added to it besides. Moreover, it is true, as I think 6,200, and one of the Pelasgian race also, that so far as it remained barbarian, it never made any great increase. Of these races then Croesus was informed that the Athenian was held subject and torn with faction by Pisistrato the son of Hippocrates, who then was despot of the Athenians. For to Hippocrates, when as a private citizen he went to view the Olympic Games, a great marvel had occurred. After he had offered the sacrifice, the cauldrons which were standing upon the hearth, full of pieces of flesh and of water, boiled without fire under them and ran over, and Chilon the Lacedaemonian, who chanced to have been present and to have seen the marvel, advised Hippocrates first not to bring into his house a wife to bear him children, and secondly, if he happened to have one already, to dismiss her, and if he chanced to have a son, to disown him. When Chilon had thus recommended, Hippocrates, they say, was not willing to be persuaded, and so there was born to him afterwards this Pisistratos, who, when the Athenians of the shore were at feud with those of the plain, Megacles the son of Alcmaeon being leader of the first faction, and Lycurgos the son of Aristolades of that of the plain, aimed at the despotism for himself, and gathered a third party. So then, after having collected supporters and called himself leader of the men of the mountain lands, he contrived a device as follows. He inflicted wounds upon himself and upon his mules, and then drove his car into the marketplace, as if he had just escaped from his opponents, who, as he alleged, had desired to kill him when he was driving into the country, and he asked the commons that he might obtain some protection from them, for before this he had gained reputation in his command against the Megarians, during which he took Nisaea and performed other signal service. And the commons of the Athenians, being deceived, gave him those men chosen from the dwellers in the city, who became not indeed the spearmen of Pisistratos, but his clubmen, for they followed behind him bearing wooden clubs. And these made insurrection with Pisistratos, and obtained possession of the Acropolis. Then Pisistratos was ruler of the Athenians, not having disturbed the existing magistrates nor changed the ancient laws, but he administered the state under that constitution of things which was already established, ordering it fairly and well. However, no long time after this, the followers of Megacles and those of Lycurgos joined together and drove him forth. Thus Pisistratos had obtained possession of Athens for the first time, and thus he lost the power before he had it firmly rooted. But those who had driven out Pisistratos became afterwards at feud with one another again, and Megacles, harassed by the party strife, sent a message to Pisistratos asking whether he was willing to have his daughter to wife, on condition of becoming despot. And Pisistratos, having accepted the proposal and made an agreement on these terms, they contrived with a view to his a device the most simple by far, as I think, that ever was practiced, considering at least that it was devised at a time when the Hellenic race had been long marked off from the barbarian as more skillful and further removed from foolish simplicity, and among the Athenians, who are accounted the first of the Hellenes in ability, in the dame of Paeania there was a woman whose name was Phaia, in height 4 cubits all but 3 fingers, and also fair of form. This woman they dressed in full armor, and caused her to ascend a chariot, and showed her the bearing in which she might best beseem her part, and so they drove to the city, having sent on heralds to run before them, who, when they arrived at the city, spoke that which had been commanded them, saying as follows: O Athenians, receive with favor Pisistratos, whom Athene herself, honoring him most of all men, brings back to her Acropolis. So the heralds went about hither and thither saying this, and straightway there came to the demes in the country round a report that Athene was bringing Pisistratos back, while at the same time the men of the city, persuaded that the woman was the very goddess herself, were paying worship to the human creature, and receiving Pisistratos. So having received back the despotism in the manner which has been said, Pisistratos, according to the agreement made with Megacles, married the daughter of Megacles. But as he had already sons who were young men, and as the descendants of Alcmaeon were said to be under a curse, therefore not desiring that children should be born to him from his newly married wife, he had commerce with her not in the accustomed manner. And at first the woman kept this secret, but afterward she told her mother, whether in answer to her inquiry or not I cannot tell, and the mother told her husband Megacles. He then was very indignant that he should be dishonored by Pisistratos, and in his anger straightway he proceeded to compose his quarrel with the men of his faction. And when Pisistratos heard of that which was being done against himself, he departed wholly from the land and came to Eretria, where he took counsel together with his sons, and the advice of Hippias having prevailed, that they should endeavor to win back the despotism, they began to gather gifts of money from those states which owed them obligations for favors received, and many contributed great sums. But the Thebans surpassed the rest in the giving of money. Then, not to make the story long, time elapsed, and at last everything was prepared for certain Argives came as mercenaries from the Peloponnesus, and a man of Naxos had come to them of his own motion, whose name was Lygdamis, and showed very great zeal in providing both money and men. So starting from Eretria, after the lapse of 10 years they ed back, and in Attica the first place of which they took possession was Marathon. While they were encamping here, their partisans from the city came to them, and also others flowed in from the various demes, to whom despotic rule was more welcome than freedom. So these were gathering themselves together, but the Athenians in the city, so long as Pisistratos was collecting the money, and afterwards when he took possession of Marathon, made no account of it, but when they heard that he was marching from Marathon towards the city, then they went to the rescue against him. These then were going in full force to fight against the exiles, and the forces of Pisistratos, as they went towards the city starting from Marathon, met them just when they came to the temple of Athene Palanis, and there encamped opposite to them. Then, moved by divine guidance, there came into the presence of Pisistratos Amphiletos the Acarnanian, a soothsayer, who approaching him uttered an oracle in hexameter verse, saying thus: But now the cast hath been made, and the net hath been widely extended, and in the night the tunnies will dart through the moonlighted waters. This oracle he uttered to him being divinely inspired, and Pisistratos, having understood the oracle, and having said that he accepted the prophecy which was uttered, led his army against the enemy. Now the Athenians from the city were just at that time occupied with the morning meal, and some of them after their meal with games of dice or with sleep, and the forces of Pisistratos fell upon the Athenians and put them to flight. Then as they fled, Pisistratos devised a very skillful counsel, to the end that the Athenians might not gather again into one body but might remain scattered abroad. He mounted his sons on horseback and sent them before him, and overtaking the fugitives they said that which was commanded them by Pisistratos, bidding them be of good cheer and that each man should depart to his own home. Thus then the Athenians did, and so Pisistratos for the third time obtained possession of Athens, and he firmly rooted his despotism by many foreign mercenaries and by much revenue of money, coming partly from the land itself and partly from about the river Strymon, and also by taking as hostages the sons of those Athenians who had remained in the land and had not at once fled, and placing them in the hands of Naxos. For this also Pisistratos conquered by war and delivered into the charge of Lygdames. Moreover, besides this, he cleansed the island of Delos in obedience to the oracles, and his cleansing was of the following kind. So far as the view from the temple extended, he dug up all the dead bodies which were buried in this part, and removed them to another part of Delos. So Pisistratos was despot of the Athenians, but of the Athenians some had fallen in the battle, and others of them with the sons of Alcmaeon were exiles from their native land. Such was the condition of things which Croesus heard was prevailing among the Athenians during this time. But as to the Lacedaemonians, he heard that they had escaped from great evils, and had now got the better of the Tegeans in the war. For when Leon and Hegesippus were kings of Sparta, the Lacedaemonians, who had good success in all their other wars, suffered disaster in that alone which they waged against the men of Tegea. Moreover, in the times before this, they had the worst laws of almost all the Hellenes, both in matters which concerned themselves alone, and also in that they had no dealings with strangers, and they made their change to a good constitution of laws. Thus, Lycurgus, a man of the Spartans who was held in high repute, came to the oracle at Delphi, and as he entered the sanctuary of the temple, straightway the Pythian prophetess said as follows: Lo, thou art come, O Lycurgus, to this rich shrine of my temple, loved thou by Zeus and by all who possess the abodes of Olympus. Whether to call thee a god I doubt in my voices prophetic, god or a man, but rather a god I think, O Lycurgus. Some say in addition to this that the Pythian prophetess also set forth to him the order of things which is now established for the Spartans, but the Lacedaemonians themselves say that Lycurgus, having become guardian of Leobotes, his brother's son, who was king of the Spartans, brought in these things from Crete. For as soon as he became guardian, he changed all the prevailing laws, and took measures that they should not transgress his institutions, and after this Lycurgus established that which appertained to war, namely enemotes and tricads and common meals, and in addition to this the ephors and the senate. Having changed thus, the Spartans had good laws, and to Lycurgus after he was dead they erected a temple, and they pay him great worship. So then, as might be supposed, with a fertile land, and with no small number of men dwelling in it, they straightway shot up and became prosperous. And it was no longer sufficient for them to keep still, but presuming that they were superior in strength to the Arcadians, they consulted the oracle at Delphi respecting conquest of the whole of Arcadia, and the Pythian prophetess gave answer thus: The land of Arcadia thou askest. Thou askest me much, I refuse it. Many there are in Arcadian land stout men, eating acorns. These will prevent thee from this. But I am not grudging towards thee, Tegea, beaten with sounding feet I will give thee to dance in, and a fair plain I will give thee to measure with line, and divide it. When the Lacedaemonians heard report of this, they held off from the other Arcadians, and marched against the Tegeans with fetters in their hands, trusting to a deceitful oracle, and expecting that they would make slaves of the men of Tegea. But having been worsted in the encounter, those of them who were taken alive worked wearing the fetters which they themselves brought with them, and having measured with line, and divided the plain of the Tegeans. And these fetters with which they had been bound were preserved even to my own time at Tegea, hanging about the temple of Athena Lear. In the former war, then, I say they struggled against the Tegeans continually with ill success, but in the time of Croesus, and in the reign of Anaxandrides and Ariston, at Lacedaemon the Spartans had at length become victors in the war, and they became so in the following manner: as they continued to be always worsted in the war by the men of Tegea, they sent messengers to consult the oracle at Delphi, and inquired what god they should propitiate in order to get the better of the men of Tegea in the war, and the Pythian prophetess made answer to them that they should bring into their land the bones of Orestes, the son of Agamemnon. Then, as they were not able to find the grave of Orestes, they sent men again to go to the god and to inquire about the spot where Orestes was laid. And when the messengers who were sent asked this, the prophetess said as follows: Tegea there is in Arcadian land, in a smooth place founded, where there do blow two blasts by strong compulsion together, stroke two there is and stroke in, and trouble on trouble. There Agamemnon's son in the life-giving earth is reposing. Him if thou bring with thee home, of Tegea thou shalt be master. When the Lacedaemonians had heard this, they were none the less far from finding it out, though they searched all places, until the time that Lycus, one of those Spartans who are called well-doers, discovered it. Now the well-doers are of the citizens the eldest, who are passing from the ranks of the horsemen in each year 5, and these are bound during that year in which they pass out from the horsemen, to allow themselves to be sent without ceasing to various places by the Spartan state. Lycus then, being one of these, discovered it in Tegea by means both of fortune and ability, for as there were at that time dealings under truce with the men of Tegea, he had come to a forge there, and was looking at iron being wrought, and he was in wonder as he saw that which was being done. The smith therefore, perceiving that he marvelled at it, ceased from his work and said, Surely thou stranger of Lacedaemon, if thou hadst seen that which I once saw, thou wouldst have marvelled much, since now it falls out that thou dost marvel so greatly at the working of this iron. For I, desiring in this enclosure to make a well, lighted in my digging upon a coffin of 7 cubits in length, and not believing that ever there had been men larger than those of the present day, I opened it, and I saw that the dead body was equal in length to the coffin. Then after I had measured it, I filled in the earth over it again. He then thus told him of that which he had seen, and the other, having thought upon that which was told, conjectured that this was Orestes according to the saying of the oracle, forming his conjecture in the following manner, whereas he saw that the smith had 2 pairs of bellows. He concluded that these were the winds spoken of, and that the anvil and the hammer were the stroke and the stroke in, and that the iron which was being wrought was the trouble laid upon trouble, making comparison by the thought that iron has been discovered for the evil of mankind. Having thus conjectured, he came back to Sparta and declared the whole matter to the Lacedaemonians, and they brought a charge against him on a fictitious pretext and drove him out into exile. So having come to Tegea, he told the smith of his evil fortune and endeavored to hire from him the enclosure, but at first he would not allow him to have it. At length, however, Lycus persuaded him, and he took up his abode there, and he dug up the grave and gathered together the bones and went with them away to Sparta. From that time, whenever they made trial of one another, the Lacedaemonians had much the advantage in the war, and by now they had subdued to themselves the greater part of Peloponnesus. Besides, Croesus, accordingly, being informed of all these things, was sending messengers to Sparta with gifts in their hands to ask for an alliance, having commanded them what they ought to say. And they, when they came, said, Croesus, king of the Lydians, and also of other nations, sent us hither and saith as follows: O Lacedaemonians, whereas the god by an oracle bade me join with myself the Hellene as a friend, therefore, since I am informed that ye are the chiefs of Hellas, I invite you according to the oracle, desiring to be your friend and your ally apart from all guile and deceit. Thus did Croesus announce to the Lacedaemonians through his messengers, and the Lacedaemonians, who themselves also had heard of the oracle given to Croesus, were pleased at the coming of the Lydians and exchanged oaths of friendship and alliance, for they were bound to Croesus also by some services rendered to them, even before this time, since the Lacedaemonians had sent to Sardis, and were buying gold there with purpose of using it for the image of Apollo, which is now set up on Mount Thornax in the Lacedaemonian land, and Croesus, when they desired to buy it, gave it them as a gift. For this reason, therefore, the Lacedaemonians accepted the alliance, and also because he chose them as his friends, preferring them to all the other Hellenes. And not only were they ready themselves when he made his offer, but they caused a mixing bowl to be made of bronze, covered outside with figures round, the rim and of such a size as to hold 300 amphors, and this they conveyed, desiring to give it as a gift in to Croesus. This bowl never came to Sardis for reasons of which two accounts are given as follows. The Lacedaemonians say that when the bowl was on its way to Sardis and came opposite the land of Samos, the men of Samos, having heard of it, sailed out with ships of war and took it away. But the Samians themselves say that the Lacedaemonians who were conveying the bowl, finding that they were too late and hearing that Sardis had been taken, and Croesus was a prisoner, sold the bowl in Samos, and certain private persons bought it and dedicated it as a votive offering in the temple of Hera, and probably those who had sold it would say when they ed to Sparta that it had been taken from them by the Samians. Thus then it happened about the mixing bowl, but meanwhile Croesus, mistaking the meaning of the oracle, was making a march into Cappadocia, expecting to overthrow Cyrus and the power of the Persians, and while Croesus was preparing to march against the Persians, one of the Lydians, who even before this time was thought to be a wise man, but in consequence of this opinion got a very great name for wisdom among the Lydians, had advised Croesus as follows. The name of the man was Sandanis. O king, thou art preparing to march against men who wear breeches of leather, and the rest of their clothing is of leather also, and they eat food not such as they desire, but such as they can obtain, dwelling in a land which is rugged, and moreover they make no use of wine, but drink water, and no figs have they for dessert, nor any other good thing. On the one hand, if thou shalt overcome them, what wilt thou take away from them, seeing they have nothing? And on the other hand, if thou shalt be overcome, consider how many good things thou wilt lose, for once having tasted our good things they will cling to them fast, and it will not be possible to drive them away. I, for my own part, feel gratitude to the gods that they do not put it into the minds of the Persians to march against the Lydians. Thus he spoke, not persuading Croesus, for it is true indeed that the Persians, before they subdued the Lydians, had no luxury nor any good thing. Now the Cappadocians are called by the Hellenes Syrians, and these Syrians, before the Persians had rule, were subjects of the Medes, but at this time they were subjects of Cyrus, for the boundary between the Median Empire and the Lydian was the river Halys, and this flows from the mountain land of Armenia through the Cilicians, and afterwards as it flows it has the Mattanians on the right hand and the Phrygians on the other side. Then passing by these and flowing up towards the north wind, it bounds on the one side the Cappadocian Syrians, and on the left hand the Paphlagonians. Thus the river Halys cuts off from the rest almost all the lower parts of Asia by a line extending from the sea that is opposite Cyprus to the Euxine, and this tract is the neck of the whole peninsula, the distance of the journey being such that 5 days are spent on the way by a man without encumbrance. Now for the following reasons Croesus was marching into Cappadocia. First, because he desired to acquire the land in addition to his own possessions, and then especially because he had confidence in the oracle and wished to take vengeance on Cyrus for Astyages. For Cyrus the son of Cambyses had conquered Astyages and was keeping him in captivity, who was brother by marriage to Croesus and king of the Medes, and he had become the brother by marriage of Croesus in this manner. A horde of the nomad Scythians at feud with the rest withdrew and sought refuge in the land of the Medes, and at this time the ruler of the Medes was Cyaxares the son of Phraortes, the son of Diox, who at first dealt well with these Scythians, being suppliants for his protection, and esteeming them very highly, he delivered boys to them to learn their speech and the art of shooting with the bow. Then time went by, and the Scythians used to go out continually to the chase, and always brought back something, till once it happened that they took nothing, and when they ed with empty hands, Cyaxares, being, as he showed on this occasion, not of an eminently good disposition, dealt with them very harshly and used insult towards them. And they, when they had received this treatment from Cyaxares, considering that they had suffered indignity, planned to kill and to cut up one of the boys who were being instructed among them, and having dressed his flesh as they had been wont to dress the wild animals, to bear it to Cyaxares and give it to him, pretending that it was game taken in hunting. And when they had given it, their design was to make their way as quickly as possible to Aliats the son of Sadiats at Sardis. This then was done, and Cyaxares with the guests who ate at his table tasted of that meat, and the Scythians having so done became suppliants for the protection of Aliats. After this, seeing that Aliats would not give up the Scythians, when Cyaxares demanded them, there had arisen war between the Lydians and the Medes lasting 5 years, in which years the Medes often discomfited the Lydians, and the Lydians often discomfited the Medes, and, among others, they fought also a battle by night. And as they still carried on the war with equally balanced fortune, in the 6th year a battle took place, in which it happened, when the fight had begun, that suddenly the day became night. And this change of the day Thales the Milesian had foretold to the Ionians, laying down as a limit this very year in which the change took place. The Lydians, however, and the Medes, when they saw that it had become night instead of day, ceased from their fighting and were much more eager, both of them, that peace should be made between them. And they who brought about the peace between them were Cyaneus the Cilician and Labynetos the Babylonian. These were they who urged also the taking of the oath by them, and they brought about an interchange of marriages, for they decided that Aliates should give his daughter Arianes to Astyages the son of Cyaxares, seeing that without the compulsion of a strong tie agreements are apt not to hold strongly together. Now these nations observe the same ceremonies in taking oaths as the Hellenes, and in addition to them they make incision into the skin of their arms, and then lick up the blood each of the other. This Astyages then, being his mother's father, Cyrus had conquered and made prisoner for a reason which I shall declare in the history which comes after. This then was the complaint which Croesus had against Cyrus when he sent to the oracles to ask if he should march against the Persians, and when a deceitful answer had come back to him, he marched into the dominion of the Persians, supposing that the answer was favorable to himself. And when Croesus came to the river Halys, then according to my account he passed his army across by the bridges which there were, but according to the account which prevails among the Hellenes, Thales the Milesian enabled him to pass his army across. For, say they, when Croesus was at a loss how his army should pass over the river, since they add, there were not yet at that time the bridges which now there are, Thales being present in. The army caused the river, which flowed then on the left hand of the army, to flow partly also on the right, and he did it thus. Beginning above the camp, he proceeded to dig a deep channel, directing it in the form of a crescent moon, so that the river might take the camp there pitched in the rear, being turned aside from its ancient course by this way along the channel, and afterwards passing by the camp might fall again into its ancient course, so that as soon as the river was thus parted in two, it became fordable by both branches. And some say even that the ancient course of the river was altogether dried up, but this tale I do not admit as true, for how then did they pass over the river as they went back? And Croesus, when he had passed over with his army, came to that place in Cappadocia, which is called Tyria. Now Tyria is the strongest place in this country, and is situated somewhere about in a line with the city of Sinope on the Euxine. Here he encamped and ravaged the fields of the Syrians. Moreover, he took the city of the Tyrians, and sold the people into slavery, and he took also all the towns that lay about it, and the Syrians, who were not guilty of any wrong, he forced to remove from their homes. Meanwhile Cyrus, having gathered his own forces, and having taken up in addition to them all who dwelt in the region between, was coming to meet Croesus. Before he began, however, to lead forth his army, he had sent heralds to the Ionians and tried to induce them to revolt from Croesus, but the Ionians would not do as he said. Then, when Cyrus was come and had encamped over against Croesus, they made trial of one another by force of arms in the land of Tyria, and after hard fighting, when many had fallen on both sides, at length, night having come on, they parted from one the other with no victory on either side. Thus the two armies contended with one another, and Croesus being ill satisfied with his own army in respect of number, for the army which he had when he fought was far smaller than that of Cyrus's, being dissatisfied with it, I say on this account, as Cyrus did not attempt to advance against him on the following day, marched back to Sardis, having it in his mind to call the Egyptians to his help according to the oath which they had taken, for he had made an alliance with Amasis king of Egypt before he made the alliance with the Lacedaemonians, and to summon the Babylonians as well, for with these also an alliance had been concluded by him, Labynetos being at that time ruler of the Babylonians, and moreover to send a message to the Lacedaemonians bidding them appear at a fixed time. And then after he had got all these together and had gathered his own army, his design was to let the winter go by, and at the coming of spring to march against the Persians. So, with these thoughts in his mind, as soon as he came to Sardis, he proceeded to send heralds to his several allies to give them notice that by the 5th month from that time they should assemble at Sardis. But the army which he had with him and which had fought with the Persians, an army which consisted of mercenary troops, he let go and disbanded altogether, never expecting that Cyrus, after having contended against him with such even fortune, would after all march upon Sardis. When Croesus had these plans in his mind, the suburb of the city became of a sudden all full of serpents. And when these had appeared, the horses leaving off to feed in their pastures came constantly thither and devoured them. When Croesus saw this, he deemed it to be a portent, as indeed it was, and forthwith he dispatched messengers to the dwelling of the Telmessians, who interpret omens, and the messengers who were sent to consult arrived there, and learnt from the Telmessians what the portent meant to signify. But they did not succeed in reporting the answer to Croesus, for before they sailed back to Sardis, Croesus had been taken prisoner. The Telmessians, however, gave decision thus, that an army speaking a foreign tongue was to be looked for by Croesus to invade his land, and that this, when it came, would subdue the native inhabitants. For they said that the serpent was born of the soil, while the horse was an enemy and a stranger. The men of Telmessos thus made answer to Croesus after he was already taken prisoner, not knowing as yet anything of the things which had happened to Sardis and to Croesus himself. Cyrus, however, so soon as Croesus marched away after the battle which had been fought in Tyria, having learnt that Croesus meant after he had marched away to disband his army, took counsel with himself, and concluded that it was good for him to march as quickly as possible to Sardis, before the power of the Lydians should be again gathered together. So when he had resolved upon this, he did it without delay, for he marched his army into Lydia with such speed that he was himself the first to announce his coming to Croesus. Then Croesus, although he had come to a great strait, since his affairs had fallen out altogether contrary to his own expectation, yet proceeded to lead forth the Lydians into battle. Now there was at this time no nation in Asia more courageous or more stout in battle than the Lydian, and they fought on horseback carrying long spears, the men being excellent in horsemanship. So when the armies had met in that plain which is in front of the city of Sardis, a plain wide and open through which flow rivers, and especially the river Hylos, all rushing down to join the largest called Hermos, which flows from the mountains sacred to the mother surnamed of Dindymos and runs out into the sea by the city of Phocaea. Then Cyrus, when he saw the Lydians being arrayed for battle, fearing their horsemen, did on the suggestion of Harpagos a meed as follows. All the camels which were in the train of his army carrying provisions and baggage he gathered together, and he took off their burdens and set men upon them provided with the equipment of cavalry. And having thus furnished them forth, he appointed them to go in front of the rest of the army towards the horsemen of Croesus, and after the camel troop he ordered the infantry to follow, and behind the infantry he placed his whole force of cavalry. Then when all his men had been placed in their several positions, he charged them to spare none of the other Lydians, slaying all who might come in their way, but Croesus himself they were not to slay, not even if he should make resistance when he was captured. Such was his charge. And he set the camels opposite the horsemen for this reason, because the horse has a fear of the camel, and cannot endure either to see his form or to scent his smell. For this reason then the trick had been devised, in order that the cavalry of Croesus might be useless, that very force wherewith the Lydian king was expecting most to shine. And as they were coming together to the battle, so soon as the horses scented the camels and saw them, they turned away back, and the hopes of Croesus were at once brought to naught. The Lydians, however, for their part did not upon that act as cowards, but when they perceived what was coming to pass, they leapt from their horses and fought with the Persians on foot. At length, however, when many had fallen on either side, the Lydians turned to flight, and having been driven within the wall of their fortress, they were besieged by the Persians. By these then a siege had been established, but Croesus, supposing that the siege would last a long time, proceeded to send from the fortress other messengers to his allies. For the former messengers were sent round to give notice that they should assemble at Sardis by the 5th month, but these he was sending out to ask them to come to his assistance as quickly as possible, because Croesus was being besieged. So then in sending to his other allies he sent also to Lacedaemon, But these two, the Spartans had themselves at this very time, for so it had fallen out, a quarrel in hand with the Argives about the district called Thyrea. For this Thyrea, being part of the Argive possessions, the Lacedaemonians had cut off and taken for themselves. Now the whole region towards the west, extending as far down as Malea, was then possessed by the Argives, both the parts situated on the mainland and also the island of Cythera with the other islands. And when the Argives had come to the rescue to save their territory from being cut off from them, then the two sides came to parley together, and agreed that 300 should fight of each side, and whichever side had the better in the fight, that nation should possess the disputed land. They agreed moreover that the main body of each army should withdraw to their own country, and not stand by while the contest was fought, for fear lest, if the armies were present, one side, seeing their countrymen suffering defeat, should come up to their support. Having made this agreement, they withdrew, and chosen men of both sides were left behind and engaged in fight with one another. So they fought and proved themselves to be equally matched, and there were left at last of 600 men 3 on the side of the Argives Alcanor and Chromios, and on the side of the Lacedaemonians Othryades. These were left alive when night came on. So then the 2 men of the Argives, supposing that they were the victors, set off to run to Argos, but the Lacedaemonian Othryades, after having stripped the corpses of the Argives and carried their arms to his own camp, remained in his place. On the next day both the 2 sides came thither to inquire about the result, and for some time both claimed the victory for themselves, the one side saying that of them more had remained alive, and the others declaring that these had fled away, whereas their own man had stood his ground and had stripped the corpses of the other party. And at length, by reason of this dispute, they fell upon one another and began to fight. And after many had fallen on both sides, the Lacedaemonians were the victors. The Argives then cut their hair short, whereas formerly they were compelled by law to wear it long, and they made a law with a curse attached to it, that from that time forth no man of the Argives should grow the hair long, nor their women wear ornaments of gold, until they should have won back Thyrea. The Lacedaemonians, however, laid down for themselves the opposite law to this, namely that they should wear long hair from that time forward, whereas before that time they had not their hair long. And they say that the one man who was left alive of the 300, namely Othryades, being ashamed to Sparta when all his comrades had been slain, slew himself there in Thyrea. Such was the condition of things at Sparta when the herald from Sardis arrived, asking them to come to the assistance of Croesus, who was being besieged. And they, notwithstanding their own difficulties, as soon as they heard the news from the herald, were eager to go to his assistance. But when they had completed their preparations and their ships were ready, there came another message reporting that the fortress of the Lydians had been taken, and that Croesus had been made prisoner. Then and not before they ceased from their efforts, being grieved at the event as at a great calamity. Now the taking of Sardis came about as follows. When the 14th day came after Croesus began to be besieged, Cyrus made proclamation to his army, sending horsemen round to the several parts of it, that he would give gifts to the man who should first scale the wall. After this the army made an attempt, and when it failed, then after all the rest had ceased from the attack, a certain Mardian, whose name was Herodotus, made an attempt to approach on that side of the citadel where no guard had been set, for they had no fear that it would ever be taken from that side, seeing that here the citadel is precipitous and unassailable. To this part of the wall alone Meles also, who formerly was king of Sardis, did not carry round the lion which his concubine bore to him, the Telmessians having given decision that if the lion should be carried round the wall, Sardis should be safe from capture, and Meles having carried it round the rest of the wall, that is to say those parts of the citadel where the fortress was open, to attack, passed over this part as being unassailable and precipitous. Now this is a part of the city which is turned towards Tmolos. So then this Mardian Herodotus, having seen on the day before how one of the Lydians had descended on that side of the citadel to recover his helmet which had rolled down from above, and had picked it up, took thought and cast the matter about in his own mind. Then he himself ascended first, and after him came up others of the Persians, and many having thus made approach, Sardis was finally taken, and the whole city was given up to plunder. Meanwhile to Croesus himself it happened thus. He had a son, of whom I made mention before, who was of good disposition enough but deprived of speech. Now in his former time of prosperity Croesus had done everything that was possible for him, and besides other things which he devised, he had also sent messengers to Delphi to inquire concerning him. And the Pythian prophetess spoke to him thus: Lydian, master of many, much blind to destiny, Croesus, do not desire to hear in thy halls that voice which is prayed for, voice of thy son, much better if this from thee were removed, since he shall first utter speech in an evil day of misfortune. Now when the fortress was being taken, one of the Persians was about to slay Croesus, taking him for another, and Croesus for his part, seeing him coming on, cared nothing for it because of the misfortune which was upon him, and to him it was indifferent that he should be slain by the stroke. But this voiceless son, when he saw the Persian coming on, by reason of terror and affliction, burst the bonds of his utterance and said, Man, slay not Croesus. This son, I say, uttered voice then, first of all, but after this he continued to use speech for the whole time of his life. The Persians then had obtained possession of Sardis, and had taken Croesus himself prisoner, after he had reigned 14 years, and had been besieged 14 days, having fulfilled the oracle, in that he had brought to an end his own great empire. So the Persians, having taken him, brought him into the presence of Cyrus, and he piled up a great pyre, and caused Croesus to go up upon it bound, in fetters, and along with him twice 7 sons of Lydians, whether it was that he meant to dedicate this offering as first fruits of his victory to some god, or whether he desired to fulfill a vow, or else had heard that Croesus was a God-fearing man, and so caused him to go up on the pyre because he wished to know if any one of the divine powers would save him, so that he should not be burnt alive. He, they say, did this, but to Croesus as he stood upon the pyre there came, although he was in such evil case, a memory of the saying of Solon, how he had said with divine inspiration that no one of the living might be called happy, and when this thought came into his mind, they say that he sighed deeply and groaned aloud, having been for long silent, and 3 times he uttered the name of Solon. Hearing this, Cyrus bade the interpreters ask Croesus who was this person on whom he called, and they came near and asked, and Croesus for a time, it is said, kept silence when he was asked this, but afterwards being pressed, he said, One whom more than much wealth I should have desired to have speech with all monarchs. Then, since his words were of doubtful import, they asked again of that which he said, and as they were urgent with him and gave him no peace, he told how once Solon, an Athenian, had come, and having inspected all his wealth had made light of it, with such and such words, and how all had turned out for him according as Solon had said, not speaking at all especially with a view to Croesus himself, but with a view to the whole human race, and especially those who seemed to themselves to be happy men. And while Croesus related these things, already the pyre was lighted, and the edges of it round about were burning. Then they say that Cyrus, hearing from the interpreters what Croesus had said, changed his purpose, and considered that he himself also was but a man, and that he was delivering another man, who had been not inferior to himself in felicity, alive to the fire, and moreover he feared the requital, and reflected that there was nothing of that which men possessed which was secure. Therefore, they say, he ordered them to extinguish as quickly as possible the fire that was burning, and to bring down Croesus and those who were with him from the pyre, and they using endeavours were not able now to get the mastery of the flames. Then it is related by the Lydians that Croesus, having learned how Cyrus had changed his mind, and seeing that every one was trying to put out the fire, but that they were no longer able to check it, cried aloud entreating Apollo, that if any gift had ever been given by him which had been acceptable to the god, he would come to his aid and rescue him from the evil which was now upon him. So he with tears entreated the god, and suddenly, they say, after clear sky and calm weather, clouds gathered and a storm burst, and it rained with a very violent shower, and the pyre was extinguished. Then Cyrus, having perceived that Croesus was a lover of the gods and a good man, caused him to be brought down from the pyre and asked him as follows, Croesus, tell me who of all men was it who persuaded thee to march upon my land, and so to become an enemy to me instead of a friend? And he said, O king, I did this to thy felicity, and to my own misfortune, and the causer of this was the god of the Hellenes, who incited me to march with my army. For no one is so senseless as to choose of his own will war rather peace, since in peace the sons bury their fathers, but in war the fathers bury their sons. But it was pleasing, I suppose, to the divine powers that these things should come to pass thus. So he spoke, and Cyrus loosed his bonds and caused him to sit near himself, and paid to him much regard. And he marveled both himself and all who were about him at the sight of Croesus. And Croesus, wrapped in thought, was silent. But after a time, turning round and seeing the Persians plundering the city of the Lydians, he said, O king, must I say to thee that which I chance to have in my thought, or must I keep silent in this my present fortune? Then Cyrus bade him say boldly whatsoever he desired, and he asked him, saying, What is the business that this great multitude of men is doing with so much eagerness? And he said, They are plundering thy city and carrying away thy wealth. And Croesus answered, Neither is it my city that they are plundering, nor my wealth which they are carrying away. For I have no longer any property in these things, but it is thy wealth that they are carrying and driving away. And Cyrus was concerned by that which Croesus had said. And he caused all the rest to withdraw, and asked Croesus what he discerned for his advantage as regards that which was being done. And he said, Since the gods gave me to thee as a slave, I think it right, if I discern anything more than others, to signify it to thee. The Persians, who are by nature unruly, are without wealth. If therefore thou shalt suffer them to carry off in plunder great wealth, and to take possession of it, then it is to be looked for that thou wilt experience this result. Thou must expect, namely, that whosoever gets possession of the largest share will make insurrection against thee. Now therefore, if that which I say is pleasing to thee, do this: set spearmen of thy guard to watch at all the gates, and let these take away the things, and say to the men who were bearing them out of the city that they must first be tithed for Zeus. And thus thou on the one hand wilt not be hated by them for taking away the things by force, and they on the other will willingly let the things go, acknowledging within themselves that thou art doing that which is just. Hearing this, Cyrus was above measure pleased, because he thought that Croesus advised well, and he commended him much, and enjoined the spearmen of his guard to perform that which Croesus had advised. And after that he spoke to Croesus thus, Croesus, since thou art prepared, like a king as thou art, to do good deeds and speak good words, therefore ask me for a gift, whatsoever thou desirest to be given thee forthwith. And he said, Master, thou wilt most do me a pleasure if thou wilt permit me to send to the god of the Hellenes, whom I honored most of all gods, these fetters, and to ask him whether it is accounted by him right to deceive those who do well to him. Then Cyrus asked him what accusation he made against the god, that he thus requested, and Croesus repeated to him all that had been in his mind, and the answers of the oracles, and especially the votive offerings, and how he had been incited by the prophecy to march upon the Persians. And thus speaking, he came back again to the request that it might be permitted to him to make this reproach against the god. And Cyrus laughed and said, Not this only shalt thou obtain from me, Croesus, but also whatsoever thou mayst desire of me at any time. Hearing this, Croesus sent certain of the Lydians to Delphi, enjoining them to lay the fetters upon the threshold of the temple, and to ask the god whether he felt no shame that he had incited Croesus by his prophecies to march upon the Persians, persuading him that he should bring to an end the empire of Cyrus, seeing that these were the first fruits of spoil which he had won from it. At the same time displaying the fetters, this they were to ask, and moreover also whether it was thought right by the gods of the Hellenes to practice ingratitude. When the Lydians came and repeated that which they were enjoined to say, it is related that the Pythian prophetess spoke as follows, the fated destiny. It is impossible even for a god to escape, and Croesus paid the debt due for the sin of his fifth ancestor, who being one of the spearmen of the Heraclidae, followed the treacherous device of a woman, and having slain his master, took possession of his royal dignity, which belonged not to him of right. And although Loxias eagerly desired that the calamity of Sardis might come upon the sons of Croesus, and not upon Croesus himself, it was not possible for him to draw the destinies aside from their course, but so much as these granted he brought to pass, and gave it as a gift to Croesus, for he put off the taking of Sardis by 3 years, and let Croesus be assured that he was taken prisoner later by these years than the fated time. Moreover, secondly, he assisted him when he was about to be burnt, and as to the oracle which was given, Croesus finds fault with good ground, for Loxias told him beforehand that if he should march upon the Persians he should destroy a great empire, and he, upon hearing this, if he wished to take counsel well, ought to have sent and asked further whether the god meant his own empire or that of Cyrus. But, as he did not comprehend that which was uttered, and did not ask again, let him pronounce himself to be the cause of that which followed. To him also, when he consulted the oracle for the last time, Loxias said that which he said concerning a mule, but this also he failed to comprehend. For Cyrus was in fact this mule, seeing that he was born of parents who were of two different races, his mother being of nobler descent and his father of less noble, for she was a Median woman, daughter of Astyages and king of the Medes, but he was a Persian, one of a race subject to the Medes and being inferior in all respects. He was the husband of one who was his royal mistress. Thus the Pythian prophetess replied to the Lydians, and they brought the answer back to Sardis and repeated it to Croesus, and he, when he heard it, acknowledged that the fault was his own, and not that of the god. With regard then to the empire of Croesus and the first conquest of Ionia, it happened thus. Now there are in Hellas many other votive offerings made by Croesus, and not only those which have been mentioned, for first at Thebes of the Boeotians there is a tripod of gold which he dedicated to the Ismenian Apollo. Then at Ephesus there are the golden cows and the greater number of the pillars of the temple, and in the temple of Athene Pronaia at Delphi a large golden shield. These were still remaining down to my own time, but others of his votive offerings have perished. And the votive offerings of Croesus at Bronchidae of the Milesians were, as I am told, equal in weight, and similar to those at Delphi. Now those which he sent to Delphi and to the temple of Amphiaraus he dedicated of his own goods, and as first fruits of the wealth inherited from his father, but the other offerings were made of the substance of a man who was his foe, who before Croesus became king had been factious against him, and had joined in endeavoring to make Pantaleon ruler of the Lydians. Now Pantaleon was a son of Aliates and a brother of Croesus, but not by the same mother, for Croesus was born to Aliates of a Carian woman, but Pantaleon of an Ionian. And when Croesus had gained possession of the kingdom by the gift of his father, he put to death the man who opposed him, drawing him upon the carding, comb, and his property, which even before that time he had vowed to dedicate, he then offered in the manner mentioned to those shrines which have been named. About his votive offerings let it suffice to have said so much. Of marvels to be recorded, the land of Lydia has no great store as compared with other lands, excepting the gold dust which is carried down from Tmolos, but one work it has to show which is larger far than any other except only those in Egypt and Babylon, for there is there the sepulchral monument of Aliates the father of Croesus, of which the base is made of larger stones, and the rest of the monument is of earth piled up. And this was built by contributions of those who practiced trade, and of the artisans and the girls who plied their traffic there, and still there existed to my own time boundary stones 5 in number erected upon the monument above, on which were carved inscriptions telling how much of the work was done by each class, and upon measurement it was found that the work of the girls was the greatest in amount, for the daughters of the common people in Lydia practiced prostitution one and all, to gather for themselves dowries, continuing this until the time when they marry, and the girls give themselves away in marriage. Now the circuit of the monument is 6 furlongs and 200 feet, 105, and the breadth is 1,300 feet, and adjoining the monument is a great lake, which the Lydians say has a never-failing supply of water, and it is called the Lake of Gyges. Such is the nature of this monument. Now the Lydians have very nearly the same customs as the Hellenes, with the exception that they prostitute their female children, and they were the first of men, so far as we know, who struck and used coin of gold or silver, and also they were the first retail traders. And the Lydians themselves say that the games which are now in use among them and among the Hellenes were also their invention. Yeah. These, they say, were invented among them at the same time as they colonized Tersinia, and this is the account they give of them. In the reign of Aetus, the son of Manes their king, there came to be a grievous dearth over the whole of Lydia, and the Lydians for a time continued to endure it. But afterwards, as it did not cease, they sought for remedies. And one devised one thing, and another of them devised another thing. And then were discovered, they say, the ways of playing with the dice and the knucklebones and the ball, and all the other games excepting draughts. For the discovery of this last is not claimed by the Lydians. These games they invented as a resource against the famine, and thus they used to do. On one of the days they would play games all the time in order, that they might not feel the want of food, and on the next they ceased from their games and had food, and thus they went on for 18 years. As, however, the evil did not slacken, but pressed upon them ever more and more, therefore their king divided the whole Lydian people into 2 parts, and he appointed by lot one part to remain, and the other to go forth from the land. And the king appointed himself to be over that one of the parts which had the lot to stay in the land, and his son to be over that which was departing, and the name of his son was Tyrsenos. So the one party of them, having obtained the lot to go forth from the land, went down to the sea at Smyrna and built ships for themselves, wherein they placed all the movable goods which they had, and sailed away to seek for means of living and a land to dwell in, until after, passing by many nations, they came at last to the land of the Ombricans, and there they founded cities and dwell up to the present time. And changing their name, they were called after the king's son who led them out from home, not Lydians but Tarsenians, taking the name from him. The Lydians then had been made subject to the Persians, as I say. And after this our history proceeds to inquire about Cyrus, who he was that destroyed the empire of Croesus, and about the Persians, in what manner they obtained the lead of Asia. Following then the report of some of the Persians, those, I mean, who do not desire to glorify the history of Cyrus, but to speak that which is in fact true, according to their report, I say, I shall write. But I could set forth also the other forms of the story in 3 several ways. The Assyrians ruled Upper Asia for 520 years, and from them the Medes were the first who made revolt. These, having fought for their freedom with the Assyrians, proved themselves good men, and thus they pushed off the yoke of slavery from themselves and were set free. And after them the other nations also did the same as the Medes, and when all on the continent were thus independent, they ed again to despotic rule as follows. There appeared among the Medes a man of great ability whose name was Diox, and this man was the son of Phraates. This Diox, having formed a desire for despotic power, did thus. Whereas the Medes dwelt in separate villages, he, being even before that time of great repute in his own village, set himself to practice just dealing much more and with greater zeal than before. And this he did although there was much lawlessness throughout the whole of Media, and although he knew that injustice is ever at feud with justice. And the Medes of the same village, seeing his manners, chose him for their judge. So he, since he was aiming at power, was upright and just, and doing thus he had no little praise from his fellow citizens, insomuch that those of the other villages, learning that Diox was a man who more than all others gave decision rightly, whereas before this they had been wont to suffer from unjust judgments, themselves also, when they heard it, came gladly to Diox to have their causes determined, and at last they trusted the business to no one else. Then, as more and more continually kept coming to him, because men learnt that his decisions proved to be according to the truth, Diox, perceiving that everything was referred to himself, would no longer sit in the place where he used formerly to sit in public to determine causes, and said that he would determine causes no more, for it was not profitable for him to neglect his own affairs and to determine causes for his neighbours all through the day. So then, since robbery and lawlessness prevailed even much more in the villages than they did before, the Medes, having assembled together in one place, considered with one another, and spoke about the state in which they were, and I suppose the friends of Diox spoke much to this effect. Seeing that we are not able to dwell in the land under the present order of things, let us set up a king from among ourselves, and thus the land will be well governed, and we ourselves shall turn to labor, and shall not be ruined by lawlessness. By some such words as these they persuaded themselves to have a king, and when they straightway proposed the question whom they should set up to be king, Diox was much put forward and commended by every one, until at last they agreed that he should be their king, And he bade them build for him a palace worthy of the royal dignity, and strengthen him with a guard of spearmen. And the Medes did so, for they built him a large and strong palace in that part of the land which he told them, and they allowed him to select spearmen from all the Medes. And when he had obtained the rule over them, he compelled the Medes to make one fortified city, and pay chief attention to this, having less regard to the other cities. And as the Medes obeyed him in this also, he built large and strong walls, those which are now called Agbatana, standing in circles one within the other. And this wall is so contrived that one circle is higher than the next by the height of the battlements alone. And to some extent, I suppose, the nature of the ground, seeing that it is on a hill, assists towards this end, but much more. Was it produced by art, since the circles are in all 7 in number, and within the last circle are the royal palace and the treasure houses? The largest of these walls is in size about equal to the circuit of the wall round Athens. And of the first circle the battlements are white, of the second black, of the third crimson, of the fourth blue, of the fifth red. Thus are the battlements of all the circles coloured with various tints, and the 2 last have their battlements, one of them overlaid with silver and the other with gold. These walls then Diox built for himself and round his own palace, and the people he commanded to dwell round about the wall. And after all was built, Diox established the rule, which he was the first to establish, ordaining that none should enter into the presence of the king, but that they deal with him, always through messengers, and that the king should be seen by no one, and moreover that to laugh or to spit in presence is unseemly, and this last for every one without exception. Now he surrounded himself with this state to the end, that his fellows, who had been brought up with him, and were of no meaner family nor behind him in manly virtue, might not be grieved by seeing him and make plots against him, but that being unseen by them, he might be thought to be of different mould 100%. Having set these things in order, and strengthened himself in his despotism, he was severe in preserving justice, and the people used to write down their causes and send them into his presence. And he determined the questions which were brought in to him, and sent them out again. Thus he used to do about the judgment of causes, and he also took order for this, that is to say, if he heard that anyone was behaving in an unruly manner, he sent for him, and punished him according as each act of wrong deserved. And he had watchers and listeners about all the land over which he ruled,